The movie opens at Eastside High School in 1967 Paterson, New Jersey. Passionate youngsters were taught by African-American history teacher Joe Clark. Frank Napier, another African-American educator, interrupts Joe's lesson to inform him that their union is meeting without them. Joe enters the meeting and asks what is happening. Other union members rebuke Joe's antics and admit that they have agreed to move Joe to a different school in exchange for a raise. In 1987, 20 years later, Eastside High has become a crime-ridden wasteland. A new law has just been passed mandating schools to attain a 75% passing mark on a basic skills exam given to all pupils, according to Dr. Frank Napier, the current superintendent of Paterson School District, who informs Mayor Don Botman of the development. New Jersey will take over a failing school if it does not pass. Frank informs Botman that only 38% of Eastside's kids passed the exam the year before and suggests Joe Clark take over as the next principal. Botman is hesitant about the proposal but agrees, so Frank pays a visit to Joe at the primary school where he works. Joe first rejects the job, but Frank convinces him to accept it by stating that this is his chance to change the world. Joe displays his authoritarian side on his first day at Eastside when she yells at the department heads without cause, orders that no one speak during the meetings he conducts, and demands the names of all hoodlums, drug dealers, misfits, and miscreants in the student population by noon. The troublemakers whose names were submitted are called to the stage during an all-school assembly. When Joe ejects the 100 or more students on stage and security ushers them out, the boisterous crowd suddenly sits up and pays attention. Joe warns the remaining students that they may be ejected just as easily and lets them know that a practice test for basic skills will be given in 2 weeks. He cautions that their futures are at stake and that they have 110 days till the test. The following evening, parents call an urgent meeting. Joe is accused of depriving worthy children of an education by Leona Barrett, a local community organizer whose troublemaking son was one of those dismissed that morning. Many of the parents admire Joe as he sticks by his choice and preaches about the responsibility he feels in his new role. Leona storms off in a rage, promising to get rid of Joe. The following morning, Thomas, a freshman who was kicked out of school for taking a white substance and missing class, begs Joe to let him back in, claiming he was falsely accused of committing crimes. Joe doesn't trust him, but he gives the youngster another chance while vowing to keep an eye on him at all times. Joe insists that the cafeteria's cages be taken down and that the school's graffiti-covered walls be renovated. When Thomas attempts to steal another student's lunch during lunch, Joe stops him. He then humiliates Thomas by ordering him and his companions to perform the school hymn while everyone else stays silent. Since the boys don't know the song, Joe makes a new rule requiring that each pupil learn it and be able to sing it on demand. Joe informs Mrs. Elliott, the chorus instructor, that she needs to teach the song to all of the students before he leaves her classroom. When she declines to stop her students from singing, Joe calls her into the hallway and dismisses her for disobedience. As a result of Mr. Darnell, an English teacher and assistant football coach, disrespecting him in the cafeteria, Joe later suspends him. The vice principal, Ms. Joan, then cautions Joe that the disruption he has made is unacceptable. After the practice test is completed, Joe requests that Levias find the results when they do not appear promptly enough. He is informed by 2 students that a brawl has started, and he rushes to the site. Joe discovers a drug dealer there assaulting Kid Ray, one of the pupils he had ejected. Joe orders, in violation of fire regulations, that security chain all side entrances closed after learning that the drug dealer entered through a side door. Later on, Joe notices Kanisha, a pupil he had taught in elementary school, wallowing in the hallway outside of his office. He inquires as to what is wrong, and Kanisha replies that her mother has expelled her from the house. After school, Kanisha is escorted home by Joe and Levias so that Mrs. Carter can compliment her on her academic performance. According to Mrs. Carter, Kanisha was born when she was just 15 years old, and she later acquired a drug addiction. She felt that Kanisha would be better off without her now that she is sober since she does not like who she is. Mrs. Carter accepts Joe's offer to assist in helping her find employment and decides to take her daughter back in. Joe is referred to as Crazy Joe Clark by a nearby newspaper, which accuses him with fighting with the parents of his students. Frank urges him to reinstate Mr. Darnell, who, as a young, African-American male teacher, serves as a positive role model for Eastside children, warning him that he risks alienating his students and staff in the same way that he did his wife. In an unexpected inspection, Fire Chief Gaines shows up at the school. Joe orders him to submit a formal request and dismisses him. Kid Ray tells Joe shortly after that he is leaving school. Joe tells the young man that he will die in a year because he thinks Ray is a drug dealer. He begs to hear the school song when he sees Thomas and his buddies walking through the hallways. They present him with a lovely, new rendition of the song and tell him that Mrs. Powers, the new chorus instructor, taught them the song. Joe locates Mrs. Powers, acting irate before complimenting her on the new arrangement and announcing Eastside as the new alma mater. Finally, the results of the practice exam are received, and they show that just 33% of Eastside students passed. Joe addresses the teachers, accusing them of failing the students, and demands the implementation of a new peer tutoring program. Under Joe's strict discipline measures, students start to prosper, and he starts to smile more around them. While this is going on, the enraged Leona Barrett is on a crusade to get Joe fired and strikes a deal with Botman in exchange for his support in her next mayoral bid. They decide to arrange for Fire Chief Gaines to return for an inspection after learning that Joe has chained the side entrances to the school. The school district attorney, Mr. Rosenberg, and Frank visit Eastside to inform Joe of the scheme. When multiple students come to Joe with their difficulties at once, Ms. Levias tries to catch Joe's attention, but he yells at her. Later, she accuses him of being an egotist who takes credit for the work of his entire team alone and requests to be transferred to a new school. On the day of the basic skills test, Joe motivates the students and offers Ms. Levias a knowing nod as he emphasizes the value of teamwork. When Ms. Powers sings "Lean on Me," the students join her, and Ms. Levias tears up the transfer request Joe gave her earlier that day. Later on in the day, Fire Chief Gaines and Barrett show up, and Joe is detained for breaking the law by chaining fire exits. Leona Barrett confronts the school board that evening at City Hall and demands Joe be fired and put in jail. Joe can hear his students protesting his arrest from inside his prison cell as they make their way up the street. They assemble outside City Hall, and Barrett uses a megaphone to address them and tell them to go home. While speaking to the students, Mayor Botman frees Joe from his cell, but they won't leave when he begs them to. Joe is required to read a piece of paper that Ms. Levias has with her. Then he joyfully declares that Eastside passed the basic skills test. Students are happy. Later, as his students receive their certificates at graduation, Joe shakes their hands.